All right, Steeler fans, it is Monday. It's the off season. This is sad, but it's back to the Monday morning conversation. We're not doing the instant reaction show. This is where I sit down with someone that I find intriguing enough to bring on the show to talk about the Steelers. And today it's Ron Lippock, who is maybe you might know him as Steelers Takeaways on Twitter, on X, whatever you want to call it. Ron, welcome to the show. How's it going?
It's going well. Thanks for having me here. It's good to see you.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. Before we get started, there might be some people out there that don't know who you are. They don't know what you've done as it pertains to the Pittsburgh Steelers. So before we get started, I want you to give a little bit of background on yourself in terms of, well, what got you intrigued with the Steelers and writing a book and a website and all that good stuff.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. So long story short, I interviewed at this stage over the past 15 years or so about over 1,000 Steelers, former Steelers and current Steelers, coaches, front office people, everyone from the videographer and the game day statisticians to Hall of Fame players and current players like Cam Hayward and Deontay Johnson. So that's just my love is just capturing stories. It's not about breaking stories necessarily. It's about capturing their stories, their experiences, and they're for those who have retired, their next stage of life type of stuff after the game, but also capturing the memories of when they played, guys from the 50s on through today. So I just continue to do that. I got interviews coming up with current Steelers like Joey Fisher, Michael Walker. Got some others coming up too. So stay tuned.
This is going to be a difficult question, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Let's talk players first. What do you think has been the best interview you've ever given with a former or current player?
It is tough, and I appreciate the question because there's different ways to answer. So guys like Troy Edwards is a good example where I always loved Troy Edwards. I thought he was going to be a great player. Didn't pan out. When I interviewed him, you don't know what to expect. Hey, I didn't get enough opportunities. Hey, they didn't treat me right. But he was completely contrite. And he said, look, I should have listened to Hines. I should have listened to the coach. I want everyone to know Coach Cowher didn't do wrong by my pick. I just didn't do right by him. So I just really appreciated that, right? That he just came out and said he owned it. And so that kind of stuff I really appreciate. I really appreciate Cam Hayward just because he's just a straight up guy. And a guy like Gary Dunn, who I don't know how many, newer Steeler fans might know. Gary Dunn was a pretty incredible personality for those 70s teams. And he had some just hysterical stories. And just as a side note, all these interviews are free. They're all on the website that I have, SteelersTakeaways.com. So you could search by key name, by keyword, and come up with these. But some of these stories are just hysterical, especially by Gary Dunn and his story of fighting with Mike Webster on the freeway. As Mike Webster abused him in practice, and they started yelling at each other on the freeway as they're driving home from practice, and they pulled over and got in a big pseudo pushing match on the side of the freeway. Stories like that, I just love those stories.
Yeah. Could you imagine if Twitter existed back then? Boy, that would be something.
Oh, brother, it would be front page news. Yeah. Yeah.
What about coaches and front office personnel? Is there any interview that stands out amongst the others?
Dungy was a really good interview. Just as a funny note, I was actually on my anniversary, and I got a call at like 7 a.m. From Tony Dungy. My wife was none too pleased because I didn't know that call was coming, but she was also understanding, as was Tony. But Kevin Gilbride was a really interesting one as well, as was Jerry Glanville. Not a Steelers coach, but I also interview non-Steelers about the rivalries that they experienced with the Steelers team. So Jerry Glanville is a really funny one just because of his memories of those games. And it's a little bit different than maybe Pittsburgh memories might be, and a little bit different slant and different take on that in there. But yeah.
What about LeBeau? You did interview Dick LeBeau, didn't you? How was that interview?
Oh, just brilliant. I mean, he's a guy I actually called back because I wanted more, and he was really gracious to let me do it. Just his mind and the way he approaches the game, and the love and the passion he has for the game. I mean, as he described it, he was doodling plays and doodling when he was a kid, and it just shows. I mean, he's just a brilliant guy and just completely just not a guy who will want to take a lot of credit for stuff. Super humble and just the kind of guy, like if you were a player, you'd kill for this coach and kill to get that coach.
And the Steelers, they definitely did. That defense did rally around their coach in a lot of ways. But let's transition now, and I want you to use some of your experiences in talking with former players and coaches. And I want to talk with you about the culture of the current team. That is a big question. That is a hot button topic, especially with those former players. You know, you hear Cam Hayward having to address it on his podcast. You hear Ben Roethlisberger bringing it up on his podcast. And a lot of people, Ryan Clark, of course, who's in the mainstream media, are always going to be talking about, like, what is the Steelers culture? Where did it go? What is your take on that as it pertains to now and maybe some of the current Steelers that you've interviewed compared to the Steelers that you interviewed of past eras?
It's really interesting. I really found the Cam Hayward perspective versus the Najee Harris perspective really fascinating to me, because Cam comes from the perspective of a guy who's been there for a long time, who's been mentored by guys who were there for a long time, and Najee, newer, right? He's a newer guy. And I think the whole idea of the Steelers, and I know you had mentioned prior to the Joe Schobert interview that we did, and his mention of how structure is a lot looser in Pittsburgh. Guys are supposed to come in and kind of do it on their own. The advantage those earlier teams had was there was a plethora of, and it's an important distinction I'm going to try to make here, is that they had a plethora of long-standing Steelers. So not just Steelers that were veteran players, but veteran players that stayed within the Steelers system. They understood the Steelers way, and the Steelers way is a very innocuous thing. But I think there's a concrete piece to that, which is you are expected to practice on your own. You're expected to work out on your own. You're expected to come up with all those regiments on your own, with the mentorship of veteran players, but you're supposed to figure that out on your own. It's much looser, and it's designed that way intentionally because they want professionals, they want adults in the room, right?
Right.
But the issue is that if you don't have a lot of veteran Steelers players, and again, long-standing Steelers players, not just veteran players, but long-standing Steelers players who've been there for a while, who get how that works, who get how to really figure out your own schedule, right? These guys are scheduled and programmed from high school, earlier than that. You know, you go to practice at this time, you work out at this time, you go to the film room at this time, you do this at this time. Then you get to the Steelers, and there's a lot less of that. And if you don't know how to navigate that, if you're not used to that, you can get, I wouldn't say lost, but you can get behind the eight ball. And I think, again, I'm not there, but that's a lot of, I think, what's been happening, because you've had a lot of new players and a lot of rookies and young players who've come into the system. They don't get that, how that Steelers way works. And there aren't as many long-standing Steelers to show them. So you got guys like Sam Hayward, who's been there a while, but how many long-standing, like you even look like Minkah Fitzpatrick, veteran player, intelligent player, clearly, but he hasn't been in the Steelers that long, right? So there hasn't been a ton of legacy Steelers who are there to show these rookies how it's done. And I think that's what's been missing. The key word was structure. There's not a ton of structure compared to other NFL teams, and that's just a fact. And it's a fact the Steelers embrace as an organization. But I think they embraced it because it worked, because you had so many veteran Steelers who were able to make that work. Now you don't have that. You don't have so many veteran, long-standing Steelers. And I think Tomlin addressed that, where he said he's going to make some changes there on structure. And I think that's what's needed in this team to a degree, right? I mean, I don't know to what level, but I think that is what's needed for these young guys to figure some stuff out and to get a little bit of hand-holding.
I think it's multifaceted too. I mean, you look at the Steelers' current roster, there's only 2 players on the roster that were on the team the last time they won a playoff game, and that was Chris Boswell and Cam Hayward. And so, you can have a defensive player of the year in TJ Watt there, and he's a great leader and he leads in his way. But he and Minkah Fitzpatrick, to me, also, they come off as they're also extremely self-motivated. They don't need someone to push them. They don't need someone to, TJ Watt does not need, probably ever since 2017, need anyone to say, hey, TJ, you might want to go work out today. He's doing that on his own anyways, because he is a self-motivated man. Some of these younger players clearly are not of that ilk. And so I'm curious as to how that'll change it. And unfortunately, we probably will never know, because it's going to happen in the facility behind closed doors. And, we'll never know. But when you think about Mike Tomlin, who's obviously going to be back, what's your take on him as a coach, as a leader, and as a guy who's trying to cultivate that culture that we just spoke about?
Well, I mean, look, I spoke to Michael Walker, who is the linebacker. He may come back. We don't know. He's a free agent. And he said he went to go play for the Steelers because of Mike T. Right? And that was his thing. He said, people go to play for him. People love playing for him, and they will run through walls for him. I don't think the issue with Mike Tomlin is that people don't want to work hard for him or anything like that, or that he's even lenient with people. I think the issue with a Mike Tomlin as a coach, if you're looking at sort of what's gone awry with the team, is that, again, I just don't think he feels he should have to be that hands-on. I think they want those guys. They want the TJ Watts and the Minkahs, to your point. They want those guys in the building come draft time. They don't want to have to create those guys. That, what do you say? He wants volunteers, not hostages.
Yeah.
I think those guys, I think there's an assumption those guys know how to be a TJ Watt and a Minkah Fitzpatrick. And sometimes they don't. Sometimes they come through college programs. These kids, like, you look at George Pickens, and I'm not singling him out because this is necessarily true, but just as a hypothetical example, here's a guy who's been elevated to sort of legend status from high school to college. And these guys are put on a pedestal for a long time. They're told that they're great. They're coaches in college. They're recruited heavily because they want to be told they want to feel like those kids. They want those kids to feel like they're great, so they play for that school. They go to that school. They're treated like that. They're treated like that by alumni. They're treated by that by everyone around them. Then they get to the NFL, and there's a whole new level of shit you got to do to be nearly as good as you were when you were in college, relative to the other players around you. They don't know how to do that necessarily. It's not a lack of even want. For some, maybe, but I think for the most part, I think it's a lack of know-how. It's a lack of understanding what to do. And Mike Tomlin, I think, historically has not wanted to be the guy to tell them, you got to do that. He'll tell them, let me take that back. He'll tell them you got to do that. But he's not the kind of guy who's going to handhold them to show them how.
Yeah.
Right? I think he's realizing that, you know what, I got to do that. Or I got to have coaches who are going to be much more in the trenches to do that. And I think that's the awakening that's happening right now. I think he did finally allude to that in his press conference where he said, things need to change in that regard specifically. Hopefully that happens. I think that's a big part of it is these guys don't know how to do what the Steelers do. And there aren't a lot of people there who are showing them how to do it. And it's unfair to the younger players to expect them to know something they don't know. It's like telling a kid to pass an algebra test who hasn't ever studied algebra.
Yeah.
So, it's some of it is on them to figure it out and pick up the book, but, they also got to get some help. And I think that's what hopefully is going to happen.
Yeah. That's the thing about this whole situation is when you think about individual players, every individual player is going to be motivated by different things. Every individual player is going to come in with a different set of circumstances. Every player is going to have, sometimes they're going to have that intrinsic motivation to be able to get it done on their own and figure it out. And sometimes you need those. Think of it as a teacher. Sometimes you have to tutor a kid. Sometimes they need a little bit more help.
Dick LeBeau said to your question earlier, Dick LeBeau, I said, I am a teacher.
Yeah.
And, and all the great Steelers coaches were teachers. Chuck Noll, Jesus, I mean, that's all you hear is how he sat next to players and taught them how to play guitar in their dorm rooms. I mean, he would teach you on anything that he possibly could. They were teachers. And I'm not saying you don't have that on this staff now, but I think they're not teaching them the fundamental Steeler way so that they can get to the point where they understand everything else that flows with it. Because if you don't know how to create your own schedule and work out on your own, because that's all been structured for you in the past, you're not going to kind of get how to study film on your own when it's in the NFL.
Right.
Unless someone's really hand-holding you and showing you how to do it.
Let's shift gears a little bit. And I want to bring up a player because obviously you've talked to a lot of former players, staffers from different eras. What is the take that you get about Art Rooney II? I mean, it's a tough family dynamic when you think of the Chief, the lovable loser finally gets over the hump. He puts Dan in place. Dan is like the patriarch of all patriarchs. And then you have Art too. What do you think about him?
I honestly don't know because, and maybe the biggest thing that I could say is the fact that we don't know. Yeah. Because, in all those past interviews, everyone talked about, being close to the Chief and how the Chief was always there. Art, was always, the Rooneys were always there in the locker room. Ike was always really close to Dan. All those famous pictures and stories from Ike. And when I talked to him, he said, like, I don't know why he glommed on me, but I'm so appreciative that he did. I'm not hearing as much of that now about the presence of the Rooneys, of Rooney with the players today. I don't know if he's as ingratiated with the players like some of those other, generations of Rooneys have been. So it's not so much what I'm hearing that makes me interested in what's happening there. It's what I'm not hearing, because in every other generation of Rooneys, I always had players tell me, yeah, he was there for me. I always saw him on the sidelines. I always say, I got close to him for this reason or that reason. I'm not hearing anything about that now.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's telling or not, but I just don't hear his name ever mentioned.
It was telling for me, and again, not there, don't know, not in the locker room or in the facility. But when Ben Roethlisberger in the last year of his career was asked about like the music in the locker room, and there was that big to do about music in the locker room, and Ben Roethlisberger said, "I've always been told you keep the music off in case Mr. Rooney comes in. If Mr. Rooney's not going to want to hear the music, so you keep it off, okay? Because he always used to walk around the practice facility, walk around the locker room, shake hands, talk to players, how you doing, how you feeling, how's the injury, whatever." And then he kind of said, so I guess, you just at some point you just throw your hands up and say it is what it is. And it's like, well, isn't there another Rooney that's walking around the locker room? Yeah. Shaking hands and stuff. So that was a little bit of a red flag, or maybe not a red flag. I don't want to make it sound like it's a problem, but it's different. Just like we talked about the players are different. Maybe it's just different.
Yeah. And change is hard. I mean, not to sound like silly, but it is hard. And this is a new generation of players.
Yeah.
We're not, and I think it's important to step back and see, like, in some respects, the Steelers aren't different than other teams. Other teams are going through the same stuff too. You look at Buffalo's, Diggs is a problem there. Every team's got their guys. I think what's different about Pittsburgh is A, the expectation, and B, from fans and from coaches, and B, Pittsburgh is really different in how it approaches the way the players work and function within the system. So when it is looser and players get a little bit closer to off the reservation, it becomes more apparent and maybe even more of a problem, because it's harder to bring them back in.
Yeah, it's a great point. Great point. Let's keep with the front office vibe here, and I want to ask your take on Omar Khan. He just completed his first calendar year as the general manager. His first NFL draft seemed to be a really good one when you look at the players that they acquired. What's your take on Omar Khan and just what he's done so far?
I think he's done a great job. I think look, they had a lot of injuries at that inside linebacker spot. If not that, I think this team's even a lot better. I think what will be interesting to me is if he stays aggressive, number one, because he certainly was aggressive last year. And I don't think he was leaps and bounds more. I think he got a little bit more credit for being hyper aggressive than over Kevin Colbert. He also had the luxury of a rookie quarterback contract that Colbert didn't have. So I think the comparison might be a little unfair. I spoke to Kevin Colbert a little bit about that. And he said, look, I don't think there's much different between what he'll be doing and what I did. He's got a little bit more runway now because of that contract, but he'll be a little bit more aggressive, but I don't think it's going to be vastly different because you got an organization built around certain principles. So, he's not going to come in and change everything. Right.
Yeah.
So circling back, I think he did a really good job. I think it'll be really interesting to see how they handle the quarterback situation, because one thing that I remind myself of, especially with Weidl, but even with Khan a little bit, is he could say, Pickett wasn't my guy, right? And you see new GMs and new guys come in and say, you know what, I can distance myself from someone else's selection and redo that pick with a new quarterback if I feel like it, because that wasn't my guy. So I have the luxury of doing that, right? It's not like I have to admit my own mistake. It's not like Kevin Colbert has to draft another quarterback 2 years after he drafted Pickett.
Right.
It's someone new. So it'll be curious to see how he handles that. I think generally they're more aggressive. I like that. I think they're more willing to do things to improve the team. The question right now is, for some of these guys, is it a development issue or is it a draft pick issue, right? For some of these, like a Calvin Austin kind of guy, right? Or is it a usage issue? So there's some questions in my mind about, some of these draft picks and we're, for those that aren't shining like we hope they would, and some of these free agent acquisitions, what's the real issue here? Yeah. So that's part of it for me.
Well, you brought up the elephant in the room, and that's the quarterback position. What's your take on that? I mean, that's what everyone's going to be talking about all offseason, and pertains to, are they going to go after a free agent? Are they going to maybe draft a quarterback? Obviously, Kenny Pickett will be back. Mason Rudolph, I don't know. What's your take on the quarterback situation?
I don't know what they're going to do. Clearly, they're going to try to get Pickett to be that guy. I mean, they have investment in him. They've got to do that, and he's not going anywhere anyway. Rudolph may or may not sign. It sounds like he kind of wants to, which is surprising. But I think they're going to gauge interest, especially after that last stretch of games he had, and he probably will get some interest. Whatever it is they do, I just don't want them to do it halfway, right? I mean, that's the problem with a lot of this quarterback situation is you get teams who kind of do it halfway. We'll stick with Pickett another year. We'll do this. This team's ready to win now. I really believe that. I actually tweeted that today. I think this team is on the cusp. I think it's really good. I think it's got to patch a few things. Obviously, it's got to fix the offensive line. It's got to fix. It needs another corner.
Yeah.
But I think it's on the cusp. I really do, and I think you got a few years left of TJ, Cam. Cam will be healthy. I think this team can win. I really believe that if it fixes this quarterback spot now. So I don't want them to do this half-assed. We'll get Rudolph back and we'll have them compete with Pickett to see who's number one. I want them to go out and get a Kirk Cousins or a really, really good quarterback. Do something bold and get a quarterback and ride that quarterback. And really, this team with good quarterback play can beat a lot of good teams. And I think it could be super competitive. But I don't know if I can do that with Kenny Pickett right now. And he hasn't shown it yet. And Rudolph, he had a good 3 or 4 week stretch. Is he a guy that you want to say, look, it's going to be between he and Rudolph, and we're going to ride that? I want them to go bold, get a really good quarterback, even if it's in the draft, if they have to move up, whatever it takes, and really give this team a real chance. What we're seeing in the playoffs right now is what it takes. You've got to have really good quarterbacks. And I'm not sure. I think Rudolph maybe could be that guy, but the Steelers right now aren't in a position to have a lot of maybe if they want to win now. And that's my concern.
Yeah, it's and then you throw in the whole offensive coordinator situation, and that muddies the waters even more because there's the people out there that do believe that Kenny Pickett does have the capabilities if he were in a system that better suit him. And this is where, for me, it gets really, really murky because you're thinking about, okay, am I going to try and bring in a coordinator who's going to fit with this guy that we drafted 20th overall 2 years ago? Or am I going to want this to see the system that I think is going to be best for success in the NFL? And then we'll find a quarterback to fit that spot. They have some tough decisions to make. What do you think about offensive coordinators? Anyone out there that obviously Mike Tomlin said that he wants play calling experience. He wants them to have, NFL experience. Is there anyone on your radar that the Steelers could possibly target?
I'm not as well versed in what offensive coordinators are the ones that are out there. I don't follow that as much. Once, the knock on the Steelers has always been, or the misperception, should I say, has always been this blue collar physical team. They want to run the ball. That's not always kind of been the case. This team, it's been more innovative than it's been given credit for since Chuck Noll. And I'm not seeing that now. That's what bothers me, especially on offense, is there's not a lot of innovation. You see the same routes. It's almost like they have 6 plays and they pick a play out of a hat that they're going to run each play in each series. Instead of like having this dynamic playbook where they can really, really keep what I'm not seeing is defenses are never on their toes, right? If we make a big play, you really see guys schemed open, you really see guys running open. We're not seeing any of that right now. And so, yes, I think Kenny Pickett and anyone would benefit from a better offensive coordinator than what we've got to offer, than we had to offer last year. But Mason Rudolph had success in that offense without an offensive coordinator. Truly,
Yes, you're right.
I want to so believe in that. If Pickett has a great offensive coordinator, he'll do well. I don't believe it right now. I'm going to have to see something different than what we've seen. And I'm not, I'm not involved in these Twitter wars of, oh, you hate Kenny Pickett, or oh, no, you love Kenny Pickett. You're allowed to be in the middle of that conversation.
Absolutely.
Like, I want to see him do well. He's not giving us evidence that he can.
Yeah.
So bring Kenny Pickett, bring a really good veteran quarterback. My guess is they won't do a Kirk Cousins type of guy. They'll do like a Jacoby Brissett kind of guy who could possibly win, like a Geno Smith kind of guy, and let them duke it out and hope that Pickett wins. But if not, you got a guy you think you could still win with. I'm betting that's what they're going to do.
Okay. Let's finish this up. I'm curious. I'm going to ask a lot of people this when I have them on for my Monday morning conversations. What are your top 3 team needs this offseason? Doesn't mean draft. It could be free agency as well. What would be your top 3 team needs for the Steelers?
Well, health won't count, but I think health is number one. Is a big part of,
That's a good one. Yeah.
inside linebacker, because I think that solves having to draft one, because I think they got talent there if they don't have to draft one if these guys are healthy. So I'll say center. I think Mason Cole struggled even in the snaps. I think a resolution of quarterback. I think they're going to need a new quarterback, and probably a corner, like a good corner. I think if you can get those 3 things fixed, I think they're in good shape.
I agree. I absolutely agree with you. So, Ron, I want to give you an opportunity again to plug both your social media, anything that you have coming up that you want to highlight, anything at all. Go ahead.
Just look, it's going to be more of the same for me. I interview 2 either current or former Steelers every week. This is a good time to get the former Steelers because they ain't playing. Yeah. So, I'll have a lot of current Steelers interviews coming up, sort of talking about their season, what the exit interviews look like, what their expectations are for free agency if they are a free agent, and what they experienced during the season, that the ups and downs, and what worked and what didn't work over the season. So I've got a really good one, I think, with Michael Walker coming up probably on Wednesday, and I have just look at SteelersTakeaways.com, look at Pittsburgh Sport, my Twitter account, and I've got interviews, 2 or 3 interviews with Steelers every week that you'll see up there, along with my sometimes fun, sometimes probably not fun tweets that you can follow. So.
Well, Ron, I thank you very much for taking the time. I do appreciate it. Hope you have a great off season. I'm sure we'll be in touch. Take it easy.
Looking forward to it. Thanks a lot, Jeff.
Uh-huh.